I want you to picture something. Picture that exactly 24 hours before your birth, a genie materialized in front of you. This genie made you a remarkable offer. You could personally design the world you were about to enter. You could determine the political system, the structure of the economy, every social rule that governed human interaction. You could engineer it all from scratch. But there was one non-negotiable condition. You would have absolutely no knowledge of who you were going to be inside that world. You would not know whether you would be born black or white. You would not know whether you would arrive as male or female. You would not know whether your brain would be sharp or slow, whether your body would be strong or fragile, whether your family would be wealthy or destitute. The only way to determine your starting position would be to reach into a barrel and pull out a single ball, and that ball alone would dictate your destiny. I call this the ovarian lottery. And I want to be completely transparent with you. I won it. I was born in the United States of America in 1924. I came into this world white. I came into this world male. And I arrived with a particular configuration of the mind that happens to interface with remarkable precision with the demands of a capitalist economy. If I had been born in the 13th century, my ability to analyze businesses, to allocate capital intelligently, to think probabilistically about the future, all of it would have been completely worthless. I would have been somebody's dinner, a wolf's probably. So yes, I freely acknowledge it. I am lucky. But here is the uncomfortable truth that almost nobody has the courage to say out loud. Luck is only the starting line. It is not the finish line, not even close. And recognizing this distinction is one of the most important mental moves you can make. When you attribute all success to luck, you disempower yourself. You become a spectator of your own life, watching from the stands as events happen to you rather than because of you. When you recognize that luck provides the conditions, but character determines the outcome, you step back into the driver's seat. That is where I want you to be. That is where every meaningful life is actually lived. I have encountered people throughout my long life who won the ovarian lottery with spectacular hands. They were born into wealth. They were born with exceptional intellect. They were born with physical beauty that opened doors before they even knocked. They squandered every single advantage they were handed, as though abundance itself was a burden too heavy to carry. And then I have watched other people who were dealt genuinely terrible cards, people born into poverty, people who faced real discrimination at every turn, people who had no connections, no platform, no safety net whatsoever. And yet they constructed lives of extraordinary meaning, dignity, and power. So what separates these two groups? What is the actual variable that determines the outcome? I can tell you with certainty, after 9 decades of observation, that it is not raw IQ. It is not talent. It is not even effort, though effort matters enormously. The real difference is their operating system, the internal code they run on, the invisible architecture of rules and principles that governs every decision they make, every morning they wake up, every temptation they face, every crisis they navigate. Most people wander through their lives the way a ship drifts without a rudder. They allow the current of society to push them wherever it pleases. They let their parents' expectations define the direction of their lives. They let the advertising industry tell them what they should want. They let whoever is speaking the loudest in the room decide what they believe. They have no governing rules. They only have reactions. And if you spend your life reacting rather than choosing, you will always be a prisoner of your circumstances. You will always be a slave to your environment. To genuinely win the game of life, not just survive it, not just muddle through it, you need a code. You need a collection of iron principles, a set of laws you refuse to violate, no matter what the world hurls at you. Over the course of my long life, I have made thousands of investments. I have been involved in building extraordinary businesses. I have accumulated considerable wealth. But the most consequential investments I ever made were not in stocks or real estate or private businesses. They were in principles, in the architecture of character itself. Today, I am going to share with you the 5 life rules that shaped who I am. These are not productivity hacks. They are not weekend shortcuts designed to make you feel clever without doing the actual work. These are the deep algorithms that can reprogram your entire orientation toward life, shifting you from someone who drifts to someone who designs. I cannot guarantee that following these rules will make you a billionaire, but I will promise you this, and I promise it with complete conviction. If you absorb these principles and actually live by them, you will never reach the end of your life and look backward with regret. That is a rare and genuinely precious thing. The first rule is about the art of subtraction. I want to open this section with a paradox, because paradoxes are where the real insights live. We are alive in the most materially abundant period in all of human history. We have access to more information than any library ever built. We have more technology, more connectivity, more opportunity, more choice than any generation that has ever walked this earth. And yet, look honestly at the people around you. Are they happier? Are they more purposeful? Are they more successful? No. They are anxious. They are overwhelmed. They are paralyzed. They are drowning in options and yet starving for direction. Why? Because they are suffering from the addition trap. The majority of people operate on a fundamentally flawed assumption. They believe that getting more out of life requires putting more into life. They think that if they want to become wealthy, they must launch 3 or 4 businesses simultaneously. If they want to become knowledgeable, they must consume 10 different subjects at once. If they want to be admired, they must accept every invitation, attend every event, and say yes to every opportunity that presents itself. This instinct feels productive. It feels ambitious, but it is actually the fastest road to mediocrity ever constructed. To truly win in this world, you do not need to add more. You need to subtract. Let me share a story that illustrates this with unusual clarity. I once had the opportunity to discuss goals and priorities with a talented commercial pilot, a man I will call Mike. He was hardworking, genuinely capable, and visibly ambitious. But when I looked at him, I saw something troubling beneath the surface. I saw frustration. I saw someone working extremely hard and feeling completely stuck, like a person running at full speed on a treadmill. Enormous effort, zero forward progress. So we sat down together, and I proposed a small exercise. I asked him to take a piece of paper and write down the top 25 things he wanted to accomplish in his lifetime. Career ambitions, family goals, health targets, skills he wanted to master. Everything. He worked through the list carefully and produced 25 items. Then I said, now look at this list and circle the 5 that matter most. The absolute non-negotiables. The ones you would sacrifice the rest for. This was genuinely difficult for him. When you are staring at a list of 25 things you genuinely want, they all look important. They all appear to deserve your energy. He labored over it, crossed things out, reconsidered, but after half an hour, he had circled 5. Now he had 2 lists. List A, the 5 circled priorities. List B, the 20 he had not circled. I asked him what he intended to do with List B. He smiled with the confidence of someone who thought he had figured it out. He said that the top 5 were his primary focus, but the remaining 20 were still meaningful to him, so he planned to work on them whenever he had spare time. A free weekend here, some leftover energy there. Secondary priorities, he called them. I looked at him and said words I believe genuinely changed the way he understood his life. I told him, no, you have it exactly backwards. Those 20 items you did not circle are not your secondary priorities. They are your enemies. From this moment forward, that list is your avoid at all costs list. You must not allocate even 1 second of attention to those 20 things. Not 1 calorie of energy. Not until and only until you have conquered the 5. He was stunned. Most people are stunned by this. And I understand why, because the obvious question is, why would a sensible, rational person classify a good goal as an enemy? The answer requires understanding something fundamental about human psychology. Bad ideas are not your problem. You are intelligent enough to avoid genuinely bad ideas. You already know that gambling your life savings on a single bet is dangerous. You already know that taking shortcuts that compromise your integrity will cost you more than they give you. Those are easy calls. The danger lies in the good ideas, the project that looks quite interesting, the business opportunity that seems reasonably promising, the commitment that feels comfortable and somewhat worthwhile. These things are seductive precisely because they are defensible. They are good enough to justify spending time on them. They are good enough to make you feel legitimately productive. And because they fall short of greatness, they will never deliver the compounding returns of a truly great pursuit. They will only steal the energy and attention that your truly great work desperately needs. You have a finite amount of cognitive fuel each day. That is simply the reality of being human. If you distribute that fuel across 25 different things, each of those things advances by 1 inch. But if you concentrate everything you have into 5 focused directions, those 5 things advance by a mile. And in the long game of life, the person who moves a mile wins. The person who moves an inch is invisible. Think about a magnifying glass held under sunlight. If you constantly shift it around, scattering the light across 20 different spots on a piece of paper, nothing meaningful happens. The paper warms slightly. But if you hold that magnifying glass perfectly still, if you concentrate the entire force of the sun onto one single point, you get fire. That is the transformative power of focused elimination. It converts you from a flashlight into a laser. But I want to warn you honestly, this is a painful process. Pruning always is. When you face that list of 20 things you must eliminate, your ego will object loudly. Your ego wants to be everything to every person. It wants to learn foreign languages and master coding and compete in athletic events and build a media presence and become a great cook, all simultaneously. Your ego is terrified of missing out on anything, but you must learn to override that fear. You must accept the discomfort of deliberate elimination. You must look at a perfectly viable project, one that could generate income, one that could be genuinely enjoyable, and set it aside entirely, not because it is bad, but because it is not the best available use of your one irreplaceable life. We inhabit a culture that has elevated busyness to the status of a virtue. Exhaustion has become a social credential. People announce how many projects they are juggling the way previous generations announced their wealth. When I encounter that kind of busyness, I do not hear ambition. I hear the sound of someone avoiding the terrifying question of what actually matters. Busyness is an anesthetic. It is a substance people take to escape the hard, honest work of making a genuine choice. A rocking chair produces constant motion but arrives nowhere. Stop rocking. Start moving. Make your list tonight. Be ruthless with the red pen. Be a gardener who loves the tree enough to cut the branches that are stealing its strength. Cut away the good. Make room for the great. The second rule is what I call the inner scorecard. This is the most difficult principle to truly master, and without it, everything else I am about to tell you will eventually collapse. My father instilled this concept in me when I was still very young, and I can state without hesitation that without this single principle as my foundation, the life I have built would not exist. He sat me down and told me there are fundamentally 2 ways to move through the world. You can operate according to the outer scorecard, which is built entirely on what other people think of you, your reputation as others perceive it, the applause you receive, the validation you collect, the image you project. Or you can operate according to the inner scorecard, which is built on what you actually think of yourself, your own standards, your own reasoning, your own sense of integrity and consistency. The vast majority of people, and when I say vast majority, I mean something approaching 99% of the population, live entirely by the outer scorecard. They select careers based on how impressive they sound at social gatherings. They purchase houses based on the reaction they imagine on their friends' faces. They make financial decisions based on how those decisions will appear to their neighbors. Here is a blunt test to determine which scorecard you are currently using. Ask yourself this: would you rather be the world's finest lover while everyone around you believed you were the world's worst? Or would you rather be the world's worst lover while everyone believed you were the finest? If you prefer the second option, being genuinely terrible at the thing but appearing masterful, you are living by the outer scorecard. You are performing. You are an actor reading lines written by your audience, and that means you are enslaved to your audience. When they applaud, you feel valuable. When they criticize, you are devastated. Your sense of worth is permanently dependent on conditions entirely outside your control. You are a leaf in whatever wind is currently blowing. But if you choose the first option, being genuinely excellent even when the world misunderstands you, then you possess something almost no one around you has. You have freedom, real freedom, not the freedom that comes from accumulated wealth, though that has its uses, but the freedom that comes from knowing that external circumstances cannot define your value, because your value resides entirely within you. I experienced the pressure of the outer scorecard most intensely during the late 1990s, during the technology bubble. The fever was extraordinary. Companies with no revenue, no profits, sometimes no actual product, were doubling in market value within weeks. People who had never read a financial statement were generating enormous paper fortunes, seemingly overnight. The world looked at Berkshire Hathaway and laughed. Publications ran articles suggesting that our approach was antiquated, that the men who built Berkshire had lost the capacity to understand how the world now worked. Even people who had trusted us with their capital called, frustrated and bewildered, asking why we were not participating in the extraordinary gains everyone else seemed to be collecting. The pressure was immense. If I had been living by the outer scorecard, I would have capitulated. I would have purchased those technology stocks simply to silence the ridicule. I would have prioritized appearing current over being correct. But instead, I sat with the numbers, and the numbers were unambiguous. They described a mania, not an economy. They described a collective delusion, not a new paradigm. So we did nothing. We absorbed the criticism. We permitted ourselves to be called relics. And then, in the year 2000, the fantasy dissolved. The stocks that had been destined for permanent ascension collapsed with extraordinary violence. People lost fortunes built over lifetimes. The celebrated architects of the new economy were suddenly insolvent, and we were still standing. The inner scorecard is what protected us. It is what allows a person to be right when the crowd is wrong. It is what allows you to remain completely calm when the entire surrounding world is experiencing collective panic. But I will not pretend that building one is easy. It demands a level of intellectual independence that most people are simply not prepared to cultivate. You must be willing to look like a fool in front of people you respect. You must be willing to be genuinely misunderstood for extended periods of time. You must be willing to endure the discomfort of being unfashionable. But when you genuinely stop requiring external validation, something remarkable happens. You become nearly unshakable. You can enter any room in modest clothing without impressive credentials to announce, and carry more authentic confidence than someone surrounded by every visible marker of success, because you know who you are, and you know it from the inside out. True freedom is not a balance sheet figure. True freedom is the quiet certainty that if everything external were stripped away tomorrow, the money, the reputation, the title, the recognition, you would still be fundamentally intact, because your worth is not housed in any of those things. Before your next significant decision, apply this simple test. Ask yourself honestly who you are doing this for. If you stripped away every observer, if you could guarantee that nobody would ever know, would you still make this choice? If the answer is no, do not make it. Build your life on the bedrock of your own standards, not on the shifting sand of public opinion. The third rule is what I think of as the circle of competence. If you spent time working alongside me, you would quickly notice that I operate with certain unmistakable habits. One of the most important is this. I maintain 3 categories for every decision placed before me. The first is yes, the second is no, and the third, and this is the one that has generated more wealth than the other 2 combined, is too hard. I spend an enormous portion of my time deliberately avoiding things I do not fully understand. This runs directly counter to how we are trained from childhood. The entire architecture of formal education is built around penalizing ignorance. From the time we are very young, we learn that not knowing an answer is a failure, something to be ashamed of, something to hide. So we develop the habit of faking comprehension, of performing confidence we do not actually possess. And that habit follows us directly into adulthood, into boardrooms and dinner tables and investment decisions, quietly causing damage at every step. Here is the liberating truth I want you to carry out of this conversation. In the game of accumulating wealth and building a meaningful life, the phrase, "I do not know," is among the most profitable sentences in any language. You are not required to have a commanding opinion on every subject. You are not obligated to understand cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, geopolitical tensions, and the future of biotechnology all simultaneously. In fact, attempting to be genuinely expert in everything guarantees that you will be genuinely expert in nothing. What you need is deep mastery of one domain, perhaps 2 if you are exceptionally disciplined. Inside that domain, you have a genuine edge. Inside that domain, the patterns that escape other people are visible to you. Inside that domain, you are the predator. Outside it, the moment you step across that line, you become the prey. One of the most clarifying business philosophies I ever encountered came from Tom Watson, the man who built IBM into one of the most significant enterprises of the 20th century. He said something devastatingly simple. I am no genius. I am smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. The problem with many intelligent people is that they cannot locate their spots with precision. They assume that intelligence is a universal fluid that flows competently into any container. They believe that excelling at one complex discipline automatically confers ability in adjacent ones. This is one of the primary mechanisms by which genuinely smart people destroy themselves financially and professionally. I want to give you a concrete example of how this plays out in practice. When people brought me investment opportunities throughout my career, the ones I declined were not primarily the terrible ones. The terrible ones were easy to dismiss. The dangerous ones were the ones that looked interesting, but sat just outside my genuine area of mastery. The temptation to stretch slightly beyond the boundary, to say I mostly understand this, was always present. And every time I gave into that temptation, the result was worse than if I had simply done nothing. Every time I stayed strictly within the boundary, the results compounded. The discipline of the circle is not about being timid. The philosophy I want you to adopt comes from Ted Williams, who remains the greatest pure hitter in the history of baseball. Williams spent his career studying the strike zone with scientific rigor. He divided it into 77 distinct cells, each the approximate size of a baseball, and he tracked his performance against pitches in each cell with meticulous precision. What he discovered was not subtle. When he swung at a ball positioned in his optimal zone, right at the center where his mechanics and his vision aligned perfectly. He hit at a level that made him legendary. When he chased a pitch just 2 inches outside that zone, his performance dropped dramatically, from extraordinary to merely average. Now, here is the critical distinction between baseball and life. In baseball, if the pitcher delivers a ball into the strike zone and you decline to swing, the umpire calls it a strike against you. The rules force you to act, but life has no such rule. There are no called strikes. The market can present you with extraordinary opportunities in industries you do not understand, and you can simply watch them pass. You can stand at the plate with your bat resting on your shoulder for months, for years, without penalty. The crowd will grow impatient. They will shout at you to swing. They will point at every pitch you let go by and calculate the theoretical wealth you are forfeiting. But you do not have to swing. You can wait. You can wait for the pitch that arrives exactly in the center of your zone, the one you understand completely, the one where you know with genuine confidence what it is worth and why. And when that pitch finally comes, you do not merely swing, you commit everything to it. This discipline is profoundly uncomfortable because of how the human ego is constructed. Your ego wants to participate in every exciting conversation. It cannot tolerate watching your neighbor profit from something you passed on. But here is what the ego will not tell you. Every time you chase a pitch outside your zone, you're gambling with someone else's edge against you. You're entering a game where the house always wins, because the house is whoever actually understands that particular domain. The size of your circle is essentially irrelevant. A very small circle, perfectly understood, with its boundaries rigorously maintained, is worth infinitely more than a vast, blurry circle of approximate knowledge. Define your perimeter with complete honesty. If you are standing on the line, saying you kind of understand something, you're already outside safe territory. Kind of understanding is functionally identical to not understanding. In a world that rewards depth, the generalist is always the victim. The fourth rule concerns what I call the citadel of reputation. If you study the trajectory of the great empires and institutions of history, you discover something counterintuitive. The most durable ones were not constructed on gold reserves or military dominance. They were constructed on something far more fragile in appearance, yet far more powerful in practice. They were built on trust. And if you study the people who rise impressively and then collapse catastrophically, you will find with striking consistency that the mechanism of their destruction was the same. They attempted to exchange their reputation for money. They decided, usually gradually rather than all at once, that short-term gains justified long-term compromise. When I evaluate the people responsible for running major enterprises, I focus on 3 qualities. The first is intelligence. The second is energy. The third is integrity. And here is where the framework becomes genuinely interesting. If someone lacks the third quality, if they are fundamentally dishonest, then I actually prefer that they also be unintelligent and lazy. Think through the physics of that for a moment. A dishonest person who is also slow-witted and low energy cannot cause catastrophic damage. They may steal some minor things of limited value. They are a nuisance, not a catastrophe. But a dishonest person who is highly intelligent and relentlessly energetic is an extraordinarily dangerous instrument. They will deploy their intelligence to locate every vulnerability in your systems. They will use their energy to exploit those vulnerabilities continuously. They will dismantle what you have built with terrifying efficiency. Integrity, therefore, is not merely a moral preference. It is the fundamental filter through which all other capability must pass before it becomes an asset rather than a liability. But I want to push this beyond the domain of hiring and business management, because the same logic applies to your own personal economy. Most people think of integrity as a kind of moral tax, a cost they pay to be a good person that prevents them from accessing certain shortcuts. They have it precisely backwards. In a world of increasing transparency, in a world where nearly everyone carries a recording device and where information spreads at the speed of a keystroke, integrity is the ultimate economic advantage. If you are cutting corners, the probability is high that the truth will eventually surface. It may take a year, it may take a decade, but it surfaces. And when it does, the cost you pay has no upper bound. When people do not trust you, every single transaction in your life becomes expensive. Contracts become lengthy because every contingency must be spelled out explicitly. Lawyers become necessary for routine matters. Simple misunderstandings escalate because you receive no benefit of the doubt. Every relationship operates under the constant friction of suspicion. This is a tax that compounds against you in the same way that trust compounds in your favor. Conversely, when you have built a reputation for absolute integrity, when your word carries more binding force than a legal document, deals materialize faster, problems dissolve more quickly, and talented people actively seek you out. You become a magnet for quality because quality recognizes and gravitates toward quality. The practical tool I have used for decades to maintain this standard is what I call the newspaper test. Before any significant action, before sending a particular message, before concluding a deal, before making a statement that could be interpreted in multiple ways, I pause and conduct a mental simulation. I imagine that tomorrow morning, a skilled journalist has written a thorough and accurate account of precisely what I just did, and that story appears prominently in a major national publication. My family reads it, my colleagues read it, my neighbors read it. They are sitting at their breakfast tables with their coffee, absorbing the details. How do I feel? Do I feel settled and proud? Or do I feel even a small, quiet flicker of discomfort? If there is any shadow of unease, not shame, not panic, just the smallest hesitation, I do not proceed. The test is not about legality. Many things are technically legal, but are nonetheless wrong. The test is not about whether anyone else is doing it. The crowd is frequently wrong, and following a dishonest crowd into trouble is not a defense. The test is not even about detection. It is about identity. It is about who you are in the moments when no one is observing you. It costs 20 years to construct a reputation. It requires approximately 5 minutes to destroy one. 5 minutes. One impulsive decision, one moment where short-term temptation overrides long-term wisdom, and the structure that took decades to build cracks in ways that never fully repair. Conduct your audit honestly. If there is anything in your current life that would fail this test, build something so clean, so consistently principled that the light can be turned on at any moment without revealing anything you would need to conceal. And now we arrive at the fifth and final rule. I call it the long game. Albert Einstein is often quoted as describing compound interest as the eighth wonder of the world, saying that those who understand it earn it, while those who do not pay it. Most people receive this observation politely, nod along, and think they comprehend it. They think it means that saving a modest amount today will produce a somewhat larger amount tomorrow. But they do not truly understand it, because if they did, they would not live the way they currently do. Compound interest is not fundamentally a financial concept. It is the operating principle of the universe. It applies to the development of skills. It applies to the construction of relationships. It applies to the accumulation of knowledge. It applies to the erosion of bad habits and the reinforcement of good ones. When people examine the wealth I have accumulated, they see the destination. They see the totality of the result. What they do not see are the variables that produced it. There are 3 variables in the compound growth formula. The first is principal, the amount you begin with. The second is the rate of return, how intelligently you deploy what you have. The third is time, how long you allow the process to run. People fixate on the first 2 variables almost exclusively. They search obsessively for ways to start with more capital. They search for the highest returning opportunities, but they dismiss the third variable, which is the actual engine. Time is not merely a factor in the equation. Time is the exponent. It is the force multiplier that makes everything else possible. Consider the mathematics of a long life of compounding. The vast majority of meaningful accumulation in wealth, in wisdom, in relationships happens not at the beginning, but at the very end, after the process has been running for decades. This is why interrupting the compounding process is so devastatingly costly. When investors panic during market downturns and sell their holdings, they are not just locking in a temporary loss. They are severing the compounding chain at its root. They are digging up the tree to examine the roots, which kills the tree. There is a Chinese proverb I have always found profound. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. We are all sitting today in the shade cast by decisions made decades ago. And the most important question you can ask yourself is, what trees am I planting today for people who will sit in their shade long after I am gone? But I want to address what is genuinely the most difficult aspect of the long game, because it is not the mathematics. The mathematics are not particularly complicated. The difficult part is the psychology. Compounding is, in its day-to-day experience, excruciatingly boring. You go to the gymnasium for a single day and stand in front of the mirror afterward. Nothing has changed. You go for a week, still nothing visible. You go for a month with perfect consistency. Perhaps, if you look very carefully in the right light, you notice the faintest suggestion of a difference. Most people abandon the process right there. They conclude it is not working. They want the result to materialize immediately, because we inhabit a culture built around immediate feedback. The digital environment we live in has been deliberately engineered to reward short attention spans and immediate gratification. When you are trained by your environment to expect instant results, patience feels like failure. Waiting feels like falling behind. This cultural conditioning is one of the most destructive forces acting on wealth creation and personal development in the modern era. It turns people towards speculation instead of investment. It drives people towards shortcuts that feel exciting but produce nothing durable. The flat part of the compounding curve, the long period where the growth is real but invisible, where you are building the foundation that everything later will stand on. That is where the separation between futures actually occurs. That is where the people who will eventually succeed diverge from the people who will eventually give up. A friend of mine who has spent his life in the world of competitive athletics once told me something I found unusually clarifying. He said that everyone wants the outcome, but very few people are willing to do the unglamorous daily work required to produce it. The same observation applies with perfect precision to the building of wealth, the development of character, and the construction of any meaningful life. Everyone wants the result. Almost nobody is willing to perform the unsexy, repetitive, unacknowledged work consistently across years and decades without external validation. Reading 500 pages when nobody is watching. Maintaining your principles during the periods when compromising them would be profitable. Holding a position when the crowd is screaming at you to abandon it. Investing in boring companies with durable advantages when everyone around you is celebrating their most recent speculative triumph. There is another dimension of the long game that people rarely discuss, and it may be the most important one. Playing the long game requires protecting yourself from catastrophic interruptions. You cannot compound if you are wiped out. This is why I have always been more focused on avoiding ruin than on maximizing gain. The person who earns 12% annually for 50 years without interruption will build far more wealth than the person who earns 25% for 30 years and then experiences a catastrophic loss that eliminates most of their capital. Survival is the prerequisite for compounding. Never put yourself in a position where a single bad outcome can end the game entirely. Maintain margins of safety. Never borrow beyond your ability to withstand a severe downturn. Never make a single bet so large that being wrong about it cannot be recovered from. The long game is only available to those who stay in the game. Your assignment for this final rule is to examine your habits rather than your goals. Goals are useful for people who want to win a single occasion. Habits are what produce people who win repeatedly, across decades, without ever stopping. Look at your daily behavior with complete honesty. Are you reading? Are you compounding your knowledge? Are you saving? Are you conducting yourself in ways that build genuine trust? Are you, every single day, rolling the snowball forward? Because if you do something small but valuable every single day without interruption, it will compound. If you read 20 pages daily, that is 7,000 pages in a year. That is approximately 30 books. In 10 years, that is 300 books of genuine depth and substance. Do you believe reading 300 excellent books would change your life? Of course it would. It would transform you in ways that are difficult to predict and impossible to overstate. Not next week, not after the circumstances become more favorable. Today, and then again tomorrow, and the day after that. You do not need to be the most talented person in the room. You do not need to be the most aggressive or the most visibly impressive. You simply need to be the most consistent. Intensity is dramatically overrated as a variable. Consistency is dramatically underrated. If you can keep the snowball rolling, if you can endure the boredom of the invisible compounding phase, if you can wait with genuine patience while everyone around you is chasing immediate returns, you will look back across 50 years and be genuinely astonished by what your daily discipline has constructed. We have now traveled the full length of this conversation together. We started with the ovarian lottery and what it actually means for how you should think about your circumstances. We moved through the art of deliberate subtraction, through the inner scorecard and the liberation it provides, through the circle of competence and the extraordinary power of knowing precisely what you do and do not understand, through the citadel of reputation and the economics of integrity, and finally, through the long game and the compound mathematics of consistent daily behavior. But I want to close with something that matters more than all of it combined. I call it the obituary test. When I observe the world from my vantage point, I see enormous numbers of people pursuing entirely the wrong objectives. They are chasing numbers on screens. They are chasing titles on business cards. They are engineering the admiration of people they will never meet. And they believe with genuine conviction that accumulating enough of these things will eventually produce happiness and meaning. I can tell you from the experience of a very long life that they are profoundly wrong. I have known individuals who possessed everything that conventional success can produce. They had magnificent private yachts. They traveled in aircraft with their names on the tail. They had buildings and institutions named in their honor. They had dinner with heads of state. And when they arrived at the end of their lives, they were alone. Their children did not seek their company. Their partners were waiting for the inheritance. Their friends were not genuinely friends. They departed this world in the most expensively equipped hospital rooms money can procure, surrounded by the finest physicians available, with no one who truly loved them present. In my estimation, that is the most complete definition of failure available to a human being. I do not care what the financial statement says. If you reach my age and nobody holds you genuinely in their heart, the life has not been well spent. The way to avoid that outcome is to engineer your life in reverse. Most people live life forward, reacting to whatever is immediately in front of them. I am asking you to live life backward. Fast forward to your final day. Imagine the people who matter most to you are gathered in that room. What do you want them to carry in their hearts when they leave? What do you want them to say quietly to each other about what you meant to them? Write that down. Not for a newspaper. Write the obituary you want written in the hearts of the people you love. And then, with that document before you, look at how you are actually living today. Are you being that person? Are you making choices consistent with being remembered that way? If the answer is not fully yes, then the adjustment needs to begin now, not eventually. The clock does not pause for convenience. Money is genuinely important. I have devoted enormous energy to understanding it and accumulating it, and I will not pretend otherwise. It provides real freedom. It dissolves real problems. But money cannot purchase love. You can purchase many things that superficially resemble love: attention, performance, company, testimonials, but not the actual thing. The only mechanism for obtaining genuine love is to be genuinely lovable, to behave in ways that warrant it, to give it consistently and without accounting for the return. The more freely you distribute love, the more returns to you. If you understand that single principle at any real depth, you have understood the most important rule of all, the one that everything else ultimately serves. Do not allow this to be another piece of content you consumed and then set aside. Do not let this be another temporary surge of motivation that fades by tomorrow morning. Information without application is nothing but noise. Wisdom that is never executed is simply vanity in a more sophisticated disguise. Take one of these 5 rules, just one, and implement it today. Perhaps you need to write your list of 25 and begin the difficult work of elimination. Perhaps you need to stop constructing decisions around what your neighbors will think and start asking what you actually believe is right. Perhaps you need to practice saying, "I do not know," more frequently and with less embarrassment. Perhaps you need to hold your next choice up to the newspaper test with genuine honesty. Or perhaps you simply need to plant a tree today and have the patience to let it grow. Whatever it is, do it. The world is full of people who have learned exactly what to do. The world is owned by the people who actually do it. You have already won a version of the lottery simply by being here, by having access to the tools and the cognitive capacity to engage with ideas like these. Do not squander the ticket. Play the game with full commitment. Play it with absolute integrity. Play it for the longest possible horizon you can imagine. That is all. And if these ideas have given you even one useful shift in how you see your situation, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel. There is more to come, and I promise you it will be worth your time.